This is the hidden map of your emotional scars. Hello, explorers of the mind. Today, we're not just taking any trip. We're going on a descent together through 5 increasingly deep levels of understanding to decipher one of the most intimate and universal mysteries, that of our inner wounds. We'll be talking about the map of your emotional scars. And no, don't see it as something dark or sad. Think of it more like a personal atlas, a treasure map that, if we learn to read it, reveals not only where we've been, but exactly who we are and who we can become. It's easy to stay on the surface with a simple, I feel bad and I don't know why. But truly understanding the origin, mechanisms, and complexities of our wounds means moving from being a passenger of our emotions to taking the helm of our own story. I promise you something, by the end of this journey, you won't see your wounds the same way. You'll see them for what they truly are, the key to understanding your own user manual. Let's start at the first level, on the surface of the known. The first thing we all associate with emotional scars are what we call triggers. A trigger, to explain it simply, is like an alarm button that got wired to a past pain. It can be a song, a smell, a word, something that, without warning, transports you back to the original wound. Another aspect we're all familiar with is avoidance. That is the conscious effort we make to steer clear of those alarm buttons. And this shapes our daily behavior in ways we sometimes don't even notice. We stop going to certain places, avoid certain conversation topics, or even distance ourselves from people who unintentionally brush against one of our scars. The most universal example is that song you used to skip on the radio because it reminded you of someone. We've all been there. That's a small emotional scar manifesting in a simple everyday action. And a third basic fact is that these wounds aren't just mental. They're felt in the body. That tightness in your chest, that knot in your stomach, that tension in your shoulders. The body keeps score of everything. But where does all this come from? Its origin in reality is a survival strategy. Our brain is designed above all to keep us safe. Imagine our ancestors on the savannah. The one who heard a twig snap and remembered that a similar sound preceded a predator's attack was the one who survived to tell the story. Their brain created an ultra-fast connection between the sound and the danger. Our brain continues to do exactly the same thing, but with emotional dangers. So triggers, avoidance, and physical reactions are just that, the tip of the iceberg, what we can all see and feel. But if this is what we see on the surface, what secret engines are driving it from underneath? Welcome to the second level, the hidden mechanisms. And here comes the first big revelation. The problem isn't the memory itself, but how your brain filed it. When we experience something overwhelming, the brain doesn't file the memory as a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It files it as a present danger in sensory and emotional fragments. Think about it. The problem isn't your memory, it's your memory's filing system. The memory isn't stored in the past drawer, but in the current emergencies drawer. That's why it feels so alive when a trigger activates it. Now here's what's interesting. Understanding this has a dual application. On one hand, it gives us an incredible opportunity. If the problem is how the information was filed, it means we can learn to refile it. A concrete example is what's known as post-traumatic growth. This is the case of someone who, after overcoming a very painful experience like a serious illness, develops a new appreciation for life, deeper relationships, and incredible inner strength. They didn't erase the memory, they refiled it as a source of wisdom and strength. But the other side of the coin is the risk. Not understanding this mechanism leads us to repeat destructive patterns. If you have a file that says, "People always abandon me," your internal alarm system will activate at the slightest sign of distance in a relationship, making you act defensively and often provoking the very abandonment you fear. An example of this is the person who, after a betrayal, lives in constant distrust. They interpret any ambiguous gesture from their new partner as a sign of danger, creating an atmosphere of tension that, ironically, can damage the new relationship. The old file is contaminating the present. All of this is governed by a kind of invisible rule that forms in our childhood. Psychologists know it as attachment theory. Simply put, the type of bond we form with our primary caregivers, our parents or the people who raised us, becomes a kind of blueprint or model for all our future relationships. We learn what to expect from love, trust, and intimacy. For example, if as a child you learned that to receive affection you had to suppress your needs and always behave well, it's very likely that as an adult you'll find yourself in relationships where you bend over backward to please others, feeling exhausted and undervalued, because that's the blueprint your brain knows. The internal structure that manages all of this is a power struggle in our brain. On one side, there's the emotional brain, our alarm system, incredibly fast and primitive. On the other, the rational brain, the more evolved part that analyzes and plans. And this internal struggle makes us vulnerable to certain thinking errors. Scientists call them cognitive biases. One of the most powerful in relation to our scars is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is basically a kind of factory default or design flaw in our brain to save energy. If a past wound left you with the core belief, "I am not enough," your brain will actively seek evidence that confirms that idea and will ignore or minimize any evidence to the contrary. It's like using a filter that only lets through information that reinforces your pain. So how do we counteract this? With a very simple but powerful mental strategy: actively seeking counter evidence. You have to become a detective who looks for proof that challenges your negative beliefs. Next time your mind tells you, "See, you failed again," stop for a second and proactively force yourself to find a small example from that same day where you did do something well. It's about training your brain to see the complete picture, not just the part that confirms the wound. There's an ancient human behavior that shapes all of this: our need to tell stories. Since we sat around the fire, we've used stories to make sense of the world and ourselves. And here's a practical takeaway for today. The story you tell yourself about your scars becomes your reality. Your wound isn't the whole story. Are you the helpless victim of your narrative, or are you the hero who, despite the wound, kept going and learned to climb the mountain? So if we extract the key real-life deduction from everything we've seen at this level, it's this: your scars don't dictate your future. It's your relationship with your scars that does. This leads us to a general rule that applies: treat your emotional wounds with the same respect and care as physical ones. No one would ignore a fracture or rub salt in a cut. Yet we often do just that with our inner pain. In practice, this means setting aside time and energy for your emotional hygiene. Whether it's talking to someone you trust, journaling, seeking professional help, or simply allowing yourself to feel without judgment. It's maintenance, not a luxury. Understanding these mechanisms gives us back our power. We stop being victims of reactions we don't understand and start to see the seams, the gears. And if you can see the gears, you can start to adjust them. But if you thought we had it all figured out, get ready, because here the story gets truly chaotic. We enter level 3, the chaos of reality, debates, and complexities. And the first major controversy is about a word we hear everywhere: forgiveness. On one hand, there are those who argue that forgiving those who hurt you is absolutely essential for healing and freeing yourself from resentment. On the other, there's a growing movement that says the pressure to forgive can be a form of self-betrayal, forcing you to minimize your own pain and absolve unacceptable behavior. What's at stake in this debate is fundamental. For the first side, what's risked is your inner peace, your ability to move forward without the weight of hatred. For the second, what's risked is your own integrity, your right to validate your pain and to say, "What happened wasn't okay." Now let's challenge a popular belief you've surely heard 1,000 times, the idea that time heals all wounds. This is one of the most widespread and at the same time most damaging myths. Time by itself does not heal deep emotional wounds. What it does is create distance. Sometimes that distance allows the wound to silently fester, creating much bigger problems in the long run. And the psychological reason we love to believe this myth is because it absolves us of responsibility. It's much more comfortable to think that healing is a passive process, requiring only waiting instead of an active process that demands work, courage, and vulnerability. This leads us to a paradox, an inherent contradiction in the subject of scars. A scar is, by definition, proof that a wound has healed. It's a symbol of resilience, but at the same time, it's a permanent reminder that the wound existed. So the scar is simultaneously a monument to your strength and a map of your vulnerability. And living with that duality, accepting that strength and fragility can coexist in the same place, is a philosophical dilemma with no easy solution. Let's now adopt a slightly more critical viewpoint. Let's think about how our culture treats trauma. There's an ethical objection few consider about an aspect almost all of us accept: the glorification of pain. There's this idea very present in art and on social media that to be profound, interesting, or authentic, you need to have a tragic story. This can create subtle pressure to exhibit our scars, turning pain into a kind of social currency. And here another controversy arises, one that has to do with memory. Is it better to remember and process pain, or is it sometimes healthier to forget and move on? This debate has changed radically over time. For much of the 20th century, the idea was to bring everything to light, talk it to death. Today, new approaches in neuroscience suggest that for some people, constantly reliving trauma can be counterproductive, strengthening the neural circuits of pain. The debate now focuses on finding a balance, how to honor the past without getting trapped in it. Ultimately, all of this connects with the root of the human condition. We are beings who remember, who feel, and who seek meaning. And the fundamental problem our scars pose to us as a species is this: how do we integrate the inevitable pain of life into a narrative that allows us not only to survive, but also to flourish and find joy? That's the million-dollar question. As you can see, this level is a tangled mess. There are no easy answers or magic formulas. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a labyrinth full of debates, paradoxes, and uncomfortable questions. You've survived the chaos. Now it's time to see the details that separate the curious from the true experts. Level 4, expert knowledge. And here's the first concept you won't find in a quick search. It's called implicit memory. When we talk about traumatic memories, we're not usually referring to the story we can tell. That's explicit memory. Implicit memory refers to the bodily sensations, emotional reactions, and behavioral patterns that were recorded without our conscious awareness. Getting a bit more technical, when an experience is too overwhelming, a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is like our memory librarian, can partially disconnect. Meanwhile, the amygdala, our smoke detector, continues to run full throttle, recording fear and physical sensations. The best analogy to explain this is to think of a car accident. Explicit memory is the police report. At this time, in this place, this happened. Implicit memory is the whiplash, the sound of twisting metal, and the sudden fear you feel months later when a car brakes sharply near you. Real healing occurs when we integrate both. And we have to talk about a key but often forgotten historical figure in this field, a French psychologist named Pierre Janet. He was working in the late 19th century, even before much more famous figures. Janet was an unsung hero. He was the first to systematically describe how traumatic events can fragment personality and create what he called fixed ideas. Practically all of our modern understanding of trauma and dissociation was built on the foundations he silently laid more than a century ago. This leads us to an alternative or rebel theory that is gaining a lot of traction today, especially against therapies that focus solely on talking. It's based on the idea that trauma doesn't reside in the event, but in the nervous system. This perspective, present in approaches like somatic experiencing, proposes that trauma is survival energy that got trapped in the body. When you face a threat and can neither fight nor flee, that energy freezes. Healing, from this point of view, involves helping the body to safely release that energy and complete those defensive responses that were left unfinished. Now, a counterintuitive detail that scientific research has revealed. We often think that big scars come from single major events, like an accident or a disaster. However, long-term studies, such as those investigating adverse childhood experiences, show that the accumulation of repeated small traumas, what is sometimes called complex trauma, can be even more detrimental to our neurological and emotional development. And this clashes with our intuition because we've been culturally conditioned to think that trauma has to be something dramatic and obvious. We find it hard to accept that seemingly minor wounds, like constant emotional neglect or repeatedly feeling invalidated, can leave equally deep or even deeper scars because they erode our foundation of security and self-esteem silently and continuously. And here comes the final niche detail that connects several of the ideas we've already seen. Let's talk about the epigenetics of trauma. Get ready for an aha moment. Recent research suggests that traumatic experiences can leave chemical marks on our DNA. They don't change our genes, but they can change how our genes are expressed. And the most astonishing thing is that these marks could be passed down to subsequent generations. This means the attachment blueprint we talked about earlier could be influenced in part by the unresolved wounds of our grandparents. Your scars could be, in part, the echo of a past you didn't even live. Reaching this level of detail gives us a much more authentic and compassionate view. We understand that our wounds are not a personal failing, but the result of an incredibly complex interaction between our biology, our personal history, and our family history. From here, we enter uncharted territory. Do you dare to look towards the final frontier? Level 5, the final frontier, speculation and wonder. The first futuristic idea is the use of neurotechnology and psychedelic-assisted therapy for healing. Very promising studies are already being conducted on how certain substances in a controlled therapeutic environment can increase neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself. In 100 years, perhaps the treatment of deep emotional scars won't just be talking, but a combination of therapy, non-invasive brain stimulation technology, and precision pharmacology that helps the brain create new neural pathways, literally building a path out of the loop of pain. But this is where science bumps up against its limits. We can map which areas of the brain activate with emotional pain. We can measure cortisol levels, the stress hormone. But science can never answer the fundamental question, what is the subjective experience of suffering? Why does it feel this way? And it's at that frontier where philosophy, art, and spirituality take over. Because to explore the what it feels like and the what it means, we don't need microscopes, but introspection, metaphors, and the search for purpose. This leads us to a dizzying philosophical implication about our own identity. If our scars and the personality we build around them are such an integral part of who we are, who would we be without them? If you could magically erase a wound, wouldn't you also be erasing the wisdom, empathy, and strength you developed because of it? And this isn't just personal, it connects with the future of humanity. We live in a world with deep collective scars, wars, injustices, pandemics, ecological disasters. Learning to heal these wounds at a societal level, understanding how collective trauma is transmitted and how to break cycles of violence and victimization, could be the most important skill we need to master to build a sustainable and peaceful future. And here I offer you the last idea, the most provocative assertion of this journey. Perhaps we've been seeing our scars all wrong. Perhaps our scars are the anchor points of our humanity. They are proof that we have loved, we have risked, we have survived. Perhaps they are the cracks where the light gets in and also where it shines out. Our descent through the 5 levels has ended. We've traveled from the visible surface to the frontiers of the unknown. Now take a moment, contemplate the full landscape we've unfolded. The map is no longer a dark and scary territory, is it? Remember at the beginning of the video we talked about something as simple and familiar as that song you couldn't listen to. It was a simple reaction on the surface, a trigger. And now, contrast that initial idea directly with the last one we explored, the possibility that this reaction to the song is a distant echo, transmitted through chemical marks on your DNA, of a pain your ancestors couldn't process, manifesting through an attachment blueprint that shapes your relationships and makes you vulnerable to confirming a negative belief about yourself. We've gone from seeing a simple reaction to contemplating a complex map that spans from neurobiology to family history and the big philosophical questions. That has been the journey. What idea from this entire journey, what part of this map has resonated most with you and your own story? I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time, your attention, and your courage to explore such a profound topic. I'd love to read your reflections in the comments. This is a space for sharing and learning together. If this journey has brought you value, I invite you to subscribe for more explorations like this and to share the video with someone you think might shed light on a part of their own map. Keep thinking, keep exploring, and above all, keep being kind to the incredibly complex and resilient human being that you are. What if your map doesn't show you where you broke, but where you can start to build?